You seem to be lost. The commercial terminals are a considerable distance from here." Those were the last words Eleanor Vance, Director of Member Experience at the ultra-exclusive Aura Jets, spoke before she vaporized her career and a 30-year legacy of curated perfection. The crisp, tearing sound of the bespoke, fiber-woven boarding pass echoed in the cavernous silence of the Teterboro private lounge. It wasn't loud, but it was definitive, a punctuation mark on a sentence of profound misjudgment. Everyone froze. The billionaire hedge fund manager, sipping a Macallan 25 neat, paused with the glass halfway to his lips. The Silicon Valley heiress, scrolling through her phone, glanced up from behind her oversized Chanel sunglasses. But the young woman in the simple grey hoodie did not flinch. She did not raise her voice. She simply watched the two halves of her $1,000 ticket flutter to the plush, cream-colored carpet. Then, with a sigh that seemed to carry more disappointment than anger, she reached into the pocket of her worn jeans and pulled out a sleek, unadorned smartphone. Eleanor, 58 years old, her silver-blonde hair sculpted into an architectural marvel that defied both gravity and humidity, crossed her arms. A faint, triumphant smirk played on her perfectly painted lips. She believed she had just expertly excised a weed from her meticulously manicured garden. She had no way of knowing that the man who would answer that call wasn't just a concerned parent. He was the silent, reclusive owner of the entire Aura Jets fleet, and he had a notoriously low tolerance for incompetence. This is the story of how a fortress of arrogance, built over decades, was brought down not by a battering ram, but by the quiet, unyielding pressure of a single, misjudged stone. The Aura Jets lounge at Teterboro was less an airport terminal and more a sanctuary for the 0.01%. It was a world away from the chaotic scrum of JFK or Newark. Here there were no lines, no TSA agents barking orders, no crying babies. The air was scented with a subtle blend of white tea and fig, a custom fragrance developed in grass. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating polished Italian marble floors and sculptures that would not have been out of place at the MoMA. The only sounds were the soft clinking of ice in heavy crystal glasses and the hushed murmurs of people for whom time was not a constraint, but a commodity to be managed. Presiding over this temple of tranquility was Eleanor Vance. For 30 years she had been the gatekeeper. She had started as a flight attendant on a legacy carrier, but her ambition and her almost supernatural ability to anticipate the needs of the wealthy had propelled her upward. She wasn't merely staff. She was a curator of experience. She knew which tech CEO preferred his Fiji water at precisely 8 degrees Celsius, and which senator's wife was allergic to orchids. She wore her uniform, a severe but elegant graphite-grey dress by a designer whose name was only whispered, not as clothing, but as armor. Her position at Aura Jets was the culmination of her life's work, a testament to her belief that standards, when rigorously applied, separated the exceptional from the merely adequate. Her gaze, a pair of icy blue eyes that missed nothing, swept the lounge. She offered a warm, practiced smile to Mr. Abernathy, the hedge fund manager. She gave a discreet nod to the young heiress. Everything was in its place. The world was ordered, serene, and most importantly, exclusive. Then her eyes narrowed. Walking through the frosted glass doors from the private tarmac entrance was an anomaly, a disruption in the carefully calibrated atmosphere. It was a young woman, no older than 20, perhaps 21. She was African American, her hair braided back in a simple, practical style. She wore no discernible makeup. Her attire consisted of dark, well-worn jeans, a pair of scuffed but sturdy-looking boots, and an oversized faded grey hoodie with a small, discreet Caltech logo embroidered on the chest. She carried a heavy-looking, battered leather satchel slung over one shoulder, from which the corner of a thick, dog-eared textbook protruded. She was looking down, not at a phone, but at a tablet displaying what appeared to be complex aeronautical schematics, her brow furrowed in concentration. Eleanor felt a familiar wave of irritation wash over her. It wasn't just the girl's attire, which was an affront to the unspoken dress code of the lounge. It was her entire demeanor, the lack of reverence, the casual academic focus in a space designed for leisurely detachment. This was a place for people who had already arrived, not for those who were still striving. The young woman, seemingly oblivious to the stares she was attracting, walked directly toward the check-in podium where Eleanor stood. Eleanor straightened her spine, her posture becoming a physical barrier. She did not wait for the girl to speak. She simply raised a perfectly manicured hand, palm out, in a universal gesture to halt. "I believe you've made a mistake," Eleanor said. Her voice was modulated, smooth as silk, but with a core of tempered steel. It was the voice she used to dismiss unqualified caterers and redirect lost limousine drivers. "This is the Aura Jet's private terminal. The commercial flights are on the other side of the airfield. I can have our concierge call you a car." The young woman looked up from her tablet. Her eyes were a deep, intelligent brown, and they held no trace of intimidation. They were calm, analytical. She blinked once, as if emerging from a deep thought. "I'm in the right place," she said. Her voice was quiet but clear and articulate. "Flight 7, destination Geneva." Eleanor allowed a small, condescending laugh to escape. It was a sound she had perfected, not overtly rude, but utterly dismissive. "Flight 7 is a fully chartered Gulfstream G650. It is a private flight. There are no individual tickets sold." She leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper, as if offering a kindness. "Perhaps you're here to meet someone? A family member? I can check the passenger manifest for you." "There's no need," the girl replied, her patience beginning to fray at the edges. "The manifest should have my name on it. Amara Sterling." She held up her phone, displaying a digital boarding pass on the screen. Eleanor did not even glance at the phone. The name meant nothing to her. Sterling was a common enough name. It lacked the resonant clang of Abernathy or Vanderbilt. "I assure you, dear, there is no one by that name on this charter. It was booked by a single party for his executive team." "I'm aware," Amara said, her voice firming. "I'm part of that party." Mr. Abernathy, who had been listening with amusement, let out a low chuckle. "Let me guess," he said, his voice slurring slightly from the scotch. "You're the new intern? Sent to fetch the coffee orders before the real executives arrive?" Amara's gaze shifted to Abernathy. She didn't scowl or retort. She simply looked at him, her expression one of mild curiosity, the way an entomologist might study a particularly uninteresting beetle. The look was so devoid of the deference he was accustomed to that it momentarily silenced him. She turned back to Eleanor. "May I please just have my physical boarding pass? I prefer to have a paper copy. My father arranged for it to be printed and held here." This was the final straw for Eleanor. The audacity, the invocation of a father, as if that name were a key to this kingdom. She had spent her life managing the whims of powerful men, and she had learned to spot the hangers-on, the assistants, the distant relatives trying to leverage a connection they barely possessed. "Let me be perfectly clear," Eleanor said, her voice losing its silken sheath and revealing the sharp blade beneath. I have been the director of member experience here for 15 years. I know every member, every guest, every pilot, and every preference. You are not on the manifest. You are not part of this group. You are, to put it plainly, trespassing in a secure area." "That's impossible," Amara stated, her calmness finally cracking to reveal a flash of frustration. "My father booked the flight himself. His name is Julian Sterling." Eleanor's mind scanned her internal database of high-net-worth individuals. Julian Sterling. The name was vaguely familiar, but in a distant, abstract way. A tech recluse? Private equity? She couldn't place a face to the name, which, in her world, meant he was insignificant. He was certainly not one of their top-tier members who commanded her immediate recognition. "Look," Eleanor said, her patience exhausted. She was conscious of her audience, of upholding the standards of the lounge. She needed to end this swiftly and decisively. "I don't have time for these games. We have a flight to prepare. Security will be here in 2 minutes to escort you out." "You don't need security," Amara said, her voice now laced with an icy resolve that mirrored Eleanor's own. "You just need to do your job. Check your system. My name is there. Amara. Sterling. Sterling. Confirmation number 704 Pa Alpha Bravo." To appease the onlookers and to demonstrate her own due diligence before having the girl removed, Eleanor turned to her computer terminal. With a series of theatrical, irritated clicks, she typed in the name. She stared at the screen, expecting to see the familiar "No record found" message. Instead, a new screen popped up. It was one she had never seen before. The background was not the standard Aura Jet's blue, but a deep, shimmering gold. At the top, in bold letters, were the words, "Sterling Protocol, Level 1 Clearance." Below it was the passenger information. Passenger, Amara J. Sterling. Flight, AJ0007, Geneva. Status, VIP Alpha. Note, principal guest. Extend all courtesies. Do not delay. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. VVVIP Alpha? She had seen VVIP status before, reserved for heads of state and their most valued clients. But Alpha? And Sterling Protocol? What did that mean? Her mind raced, searching for a logical explanation. A system glitch. A hack. It had to be. The girl in the frayed hoodie simply didn't compute with the golden screen in front of her. The cognitive dissonance was too great. She looked from the screen to Amara's worn-out boots, then back to the screen. The reality of the situation was trying to penetrate the thick walls of her prejudice, but she refused to let it in. It was a mistake. A clever forgery. "This is a very sophisticated fake," Eleanor said, her voice a low, dangerous hiss. She was doubling down, committing herself fully to the path she had chosen. "You've somehow managed to hack our system. I'm impressed, but your little charade is over." "It's not a fake," Amara said, her voice tired. "Can I please just have my pass so I can board? I need to review these documents before we take off." She gestured with her tablet. Eleanor reached under the counter. Her hand closed around the single boarding pass that had been printed that morning on the thick, cream-colored cardstock reserved for their most important clients. It felt heavy, substantial in her hand. She looked at the name embossed in gold foil. Amara J. Sterling. And then, in a moment of supreme, self-righteous fury, she did the unthinkable. She held up the boarding pass, making sure Amara and the rest of the lounge could see it. She locked eyes with the young woman, a cruel, triumphant sneer twisting her features. "This," Eleanor announced, her voice ringing with finality, "is what we do with fraudulent documents at Aura Jets." "Rip," She tore the thick cardstock in half. Then she brought the two halves together and tore them again, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent room. She crumpled the 4 pieces into a tight ball and, with a flick of her wrist, tossed them into the polished chrome wastebasket beside her desk. "You are denied boarding," Eleanor declared, dusting her hands together as if she had just disposed of a piece of trash. "Now, get out of my lounge before I have you arrested for wire fraud and trespassing." Mr. Abernathy let out a short, approving bark of a laugh. "Well done, Eleanor. Have to keep the standards up. Can't have every charity case with a laptop wandering in here." He raised his glass in a mock toast. Amara stared at the wastebasket where her legal right to passage lay in ruins. For a fleeting moment, her composure crumbled. A flicker of hurt, of sheer disbelief, crossed her face. She looked young, vulnerable, but then she straightened up, her spine becoming a rod of steel. She took a slow, deep breath, and when she looked back at Eleanor, her eyes were not angry. They were filled with a chilling, profound pity. "You have made a grave error," Amara said, her voice quiet, but carrying the weight of an impending storm. "Move," Eleanor snapped, gesturing to the security guards who were now approaching purposefully from across the lounge. "Next." Amara didn't move. She stood her ground, a small, unmovable island in a sea of hostility. She raised her phone. "I need you to retrieve those pieces, tape them together, and honor my ticket," she said calmly, "or you need to issue me a new one. I am getting on that plane. You have one last chance to fix this." "The only thing you'll be getting on is the evening news, sweetheart," Eleanor sneered, her confidence bolstered by the approaching guards. "After your mugshot is taken." Amara ignored her. She tapped her phone screen, selecting a single contact from her favorites list. It was labeled simply, "Dad." The phone rang once before it was answered. A man's voice, deep and resonant with an undercurrent of immense power, came through the speaker. It was a voice accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Amara, you should be boarding. Is there a problem?" "Hi, Dad," Amara said, holding the phone up slightly. Her voice was steady, but her father could likely hear the subtle tension in it. "I'm here at the lounge. The Director of Member Experience, a Ms." Amara glanced at Eleanor's ornate silver nameplate. "Eleanor Vance. She seems to believe my boarding pass is a forgery. She just tore it up and threw it in the trash." There was a silence on the other end of the line. It was not an empty silence. It was a heavy, pressurized void, the kind of quiet that precedes a cataclysm. The air in the lounge seemed to grow thick, heavy. "She did what?" Julian Sterling's voice was dangerously calm. The lack of volume was more terrifying than any shout. "She tore it up, Dad. Called me a trespasser. She's having security remove me right now." Eleanor felt the first, tiny prickle of doubt. The voice on the phone. It had a quality she couldn't quite place, an echo of command that resonated on a primal level. But she was in too deep. To back down now would be to admit she was wrong, a concept foreign to her nature. "Tell your father his complaints can be filed with our corporate office," Eleanor snapped, speaking toward the phone, "after you've been processed by the Port Authority police." "Who is that speaking?" Julian Sterling asked. "That's Miss Vance," Amara replied. "Put her on the phone," Julian commanded. "She refuses to speak with you, Dad. She's busy." Another pause. Longer this time. When Julian Sterling spoke again, his voice was stripped of all warmth, leaving only the cold, hard calculus of a man about to move pieces on a global chessboard. "Amara, listen to me very carefully. Do not move from that spot. Is the Gulf Stream still on the tarmac?" "Yes, I can see it out the window." "Good. I'm making a call. I need 90 seconds." The line went dead. Eleanor scoffed. 90 seconds. The guards are already here. She nodded to the two large men in crisp black suits who had now flanked Amara. Gentlemen, please escort this individual from the premises. One of the guards, a young man named Rick, who looked deeply uncomfortable, stepped forward. Ma'am, maybe we should just... He was cut off by a series of piercing electronic chimes. It wasn't an alarm. It was a system-wide priority alert. Every screen in the lounge, the departure boards, the news monitors, even the tablets used by the waitstaff, flickered and went black. For a moment, there was nothing but darkness. Then, they all lit up again. But this time, they displayed a single, uniform message. The background was the same shimmering gold as the screen on Eleanor's terminal. The text was stark white. Directive au revoir. All Aura jets, global operations are hereby placed on an indefinite ground hold. No aircraft may depart. No aircraft may be boarded. Authority, J. Sterling, Chairman, Aura Holdings Group. Stand by for protocol enforcement. Eleanor stared at the screen, the words blurring in front of her eyes. J. Sterling, Chairman, Aura Holdings Group. Aura Holdings Group was the faceless, multi-billion-dollar private equity firm that had acquired Aura Jets 5 years ago. The firm was notoriously secretive. The chairman was a ghost, a legend in financial circles, a man who never gave interviews, whose picture had never been published. His name was Julian Sterling. The blood drained from Eleanor's face, leaving behind a waxy, pale mask. Her carefully constructed world, her kingdom of marble and whispers, began to dissolve around her. The smirk on Mr. Abernathy's face had vanished, replaced by a look of dawning horror. The security guards froze, looking from the screens to Amara as if she had just performed some sort of dark magic. The lounge doors burst open, but it wasn't more security. It was Captain Eva Rostova, the lead pilot for Flight 7, a stern Russian woman who was a legend in the private aviation world. Her face was pale, her expression frantic. She ran into the lounge, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on Amara. She rushed over, ignoring Eleanor completely. "Miss Sterling," Captain Rostova said, her voice tight with urgency and disbelief. "My deepest apologies. We just received a red-line directive from the chairman himself. He has grounded the entire global fleet. He's on his way. He said you were being detained." Eleanor felt her knees begin to buckle. She gripped the edge of her podium for support. I didn't know," she whispered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "She was wearing the hoodie." "She is the daughter of the man who signs every single one of our paychecks," Rostova hissed, her fury barely contained. "The man who just cost this company millions of dollars in a single phone call to prove a point. Do you have any idea what you have done?" "Protocol?" Amara's quiet voice cut through the tension. She walked to the wastebasket, reached in, and retrieved the crumpled ball of her ticket. She smoothed the pieces out on the marble countertop. "Is public humiliation protocol? Is destroying a passenger's legal documentation protocol? Is assuming a black woman in a Caltech hoodie must be a fraud your protocol?" Suddenly, a new alert flashed on the screens, overriding the first one. Update. Flight AJ007, Geneva. Maintenance flag. Critical. Portside aileron hydraulic sensor is non-responsive. Aircraft is non-flyable pending inspection. Captain Rostova swore under her breath in Russian. The sensor was fluctuating on the pre-flight check. Maintenance said it was a software glitch, that a system reset would fix it. They're backed up with the weather front moving in. While the captain and Eleanor were reeling from this new crisis, Amara stepped closer to the window, peering intently at the Gulf Stream on the tarmac. Her brow furrowed, the same look of intense concentration she'd had when she walked in. "A non-responsive sensor on a G650's primary flight control?" she mused, almost to herself. "It's almost never the sensor itself. They're triple redundant. It's usually a feedback loop issue in the diagnostic software, especially if there was a recent patch. Did they check the integrity of the harness connection at the actuator junction box? A slight pressure change from the incoming storm front could be just enough to compromise a loose fitting and cause a false negative reading." Captain Rostova stared at her. "How in the world would you know that?" Amara tapped the Caltech logo on her hoodie. "My thesis is on fly-by-wire control systems in variable atmospheric conditions. I've been reading the G6R50's maintenance logs for the last 2 weeks. For fun." Before anyone could process this, the main doors to the lounge slid open with a soft whoosh. The ambient noise of the terminal seemed to be sucked into a vortex of silence. Standing there was a man in his late 50s. He was tall and lean, dressed in a simple, dark cashmere sweater and trousers that probably cost more than Eleanor's car. He wasn't handsome in a conventional way, but he radiated an aura of such intense, compressed energy that it was difficult to look away. His eyes, the same intelligent brown as his daughter's, swept the room, taking in every detail with cold, rapid precision. He looked at the screens. He looked at the stunned pilot. He looked at the trembling Eleanor Vance. Then his eyes landed on his daughter. The coldness in his expression melted away, replaced by a deep, paternal concern. "Amara," Julian Sterling said, his voice calm but echoing with absolute authority. He walked toward her, his footsteps the only sound in the room. He embraced her briefly, then held her at arm's length, scanning her for any sign of distress. "I'm fine, Dad," she said quietly. He nodded once, then turned his gaze upon Eleanor. He looked at the badge on her dress. He looked at the ripped ticket on the counter. He looked at the fear in her eyes. The air grew thin, electric with unspoken consequences. "So," Julian Sterling said, his voice a soft, terrifying rumble, "you're the one who decided my daughter was trash." Julian Sterling did not raise his voice. Shouting was a tool for those who had lost control, and Julian had not lost control of a situation since he was a teenager. He stood before Eleanor's podium, a monument of quiet, devastating power. He looked at her, not with anger, but with the detached curiosity of a surgeon about to make a difficult but necessary incision. "I asked you a question, Miss Vance," he said, his voice as smooth and cold as the marble floor. "You looked at my daughter, a gifted aerospace engineer who holds 3 patents before her 21st birthday, and you made a judgment. Explain the criteria you used." Eleanor's throat felt as if it were packed with sand. "Mr. Sterling, sir, our clientele, we maintain a certain atmosphere." The words came out as a pathetic, strangled whisper. "An atmosphere," Julian repeated, the word hanging in the air. He made a slow, deliberate gesture that encompassed the entire opulent lounge. "And tell me, is baselessly accusing a guest of fraud, destroying their property, and attempting to have them arrested conducive to a welcoming atmosphere?" She didn't look the part," Eleanor finally stammered, the ugly, simple truth of it laid bare. "Ah," Julian nodded slowly, as if she had just confirmed a complex scientific theory. "She didn't look the part." He turned his gaze on Mr. Abernathy, who was now attempting to blend in with a large, potted ficus. The man's face was slick with sweat, his expensive suit suddenly looking like a cheap costume. "And you," Julian said, his voice dropping even lower. "You found this amusing." "Mr. Sterling, a misunderstanding," Abernathy blurted out, stepping forward with a sycophantic, trembling smile. "Huge admirer of your work in the renewable energy sector. I was simply making a light-hearted jest." "My daughter was being harassed, and you chose to participate," Julian stated, not as an accusation, but as a fact. "My team is currently reviewing the lounge's security footage. You have a membership here, Mr. Abernathy?" "Yes, of course. 5 years. Diamond tier," Abernathy said, puffing up his chest slightly, as if this were a shield. "Had," Julian corrected him. "Your membership is revoked, effective immediately. You will be billed for the scotch. A lifetime ban will be placed on you and any entity you control from using any service owned by Aura Holdings. My legal team will be in touch regarding a potential slander suit. Now get out." "You can't do that," Abernathy sputtered, his face turning a blotchy red. I'll tell everyone." "Please do," Julian said with a chilling smile. "Tell them how you were banned for life for mocking a young woman and encouraging my staff to discriminate against her. I'm sure your board of directors will find it an excellent use of your time." He gestured to the security guards. "These gentlemen were about to escort my daughter out. They can escort you instead." Abernathy, deflated and humiliated, was marched out of the lounge, his blustering protests fading down the hall. The silence that returned was heavier than before. Julian Sterling turned his full attention back to Eleanor. She was visibly trembling, her carefully constructed composure shattered into a million pieces. "Please," she whimpered, tears beginning to trace paths through her expensive foundation. "Mr. Sterling, I beg you. This job, it's my whole life. I have a mortgage. I've given 30 years to this industry." "And that is the tragedy of it," Julian said, his voice laced with a sliver of something that might have been pity. 30 years, and you've learned nothing of value. You've learned how to flatter and how to exclude. You've confused service with servitude and authority with wisdom. You haven't been building a career, Ms. Vance. You've been building a cage, and you've just locked yourself inside it." He looked at his daughter. "Amara, come here." Amara stepped forward, her expression unreadable. "This woman has insulted you," Julian said, his voice softening as he spoke to her. "She has insulted our family, and she has endangered the reputation of my company. In a few years, this company will be yours to lead. The decision of what happens to her, therefore, is also yours. What is the appropriate response?" The entire lounge held its breath. Eleanor looked at Amara, her face a desperate, pleading mask. This young woman, this girl she had dismissed as riffraff, now held her entire existence in her hands. Amara looked at Eleanor. She saw the fear, the desperation. She saw the ruins of a life built on a fragile foundation of prejudice. She could have demanded her firing. She could have savored the revenge. But Amara Sterling was her father's daughter in more than just name. She was strategic. "Firing her is too easy," Amara said, her voice clear and steady. The room seemed to lean in to hear her. "If you fire her, she becomes a martyr to a certain kind of person. She'll write a book, go on talk shows, and complain about being a victim of cancel culture. She won't learn anything. She'll just become more bitter." Julian listened, his expression intrigued. "So, what do you propose?" Amara's gaze drifted to the flashing maintenance alert on the screen. Then she looked at Captain Rostova. "You have a non-flyable aircraft. Because your maintenance crew is swamped and misdiagnosed a simple hardware feedback issue as a software glitch. You have a director of member experience who doesn't understand the first thing about the people she serves or the machines that generate her salary." She looked back at her father. "The problem isn't just one person. It's a systemic ignorance, a disconnect. She then turned to Eleanor. "You love standards, Miss Vance. You love protocols. So let's give you some new ones to learn." Amara pointed out the window, not at the sleek jet, but at the hangars in the distance. "She keeps her job. She keeps her salary. For now. But she's being reassigned. Effective immediately, she is the new junior assistant to the director of maintenance. She won't talk to clients. She won't wear a designer dress. She'll wear a safety vest and steel-toed boots. Her job will be to log every single part, every diagnostic report, every maintenance check for the entire East Coast fleet. She will learn what a hydraulic sensor is. She will learn the name of every mechanic and every ground crew member. She will learn this company from the greasy floor up. She will learn to respect the machine before she's allowed to serve the passengers again." Julian Sterling's lips curved into a slow, proud smile. It was the smile of a man who had just seen his legacy confirmed. "Brilliant," he whispered. He looked at the airport manager, who had materialized at his elbow, looking terrified. "You heard my daughter. Arrange the transfer. Ms. Vance, you will report to Hangar 4B at 600 tomorrow morning. Mr. Rodriguez, the maintenance director, will be your new supervisor. I hear he's a stickler for punctuality." Eleanor's jaw dropped. The hangar? With the mechanics? The noise? The grease? The labor? It was a fate worse than being fired. It was a public, protracted humiliation. "But I can't. I don't know anything about mechanics," she stammered. "Then you will learn," Julian said coldly, "or you can resign. In which case, you will forfeit your severance, your pension, and you will sign a non-disclosure agreement so airtight that you won't be able to even whisper the words "Aura Jets" without my lawyers seizing your house. The choice is yours." Defeated, broken, Eleanor nodded numbly. "I'll take the transfer." "Wise decision," Julian said. He then turned to Captain Rostova. "Captain, please go with my daughter to the aircraft. She has a theory about your sensor issue. I suggest you listen to her. Carefully." He handed the captain his own black, unlimited access security card. "Give her full access, and get me Rodriguez on the phone." As a stunned Captain Rostova escorted Amara out of the lounge and toward the waiting jet, Eleanor watched them go. She saw the young woman in the hoodie walking with the confident stride of someone who belonged, not because of her father's name, but because she possessed knowledge, purpose, and a grace that Eleanor had never known. An hour later, Flight 7 was cleared for takeoff. The maintenance log showed the issue had been resolved. The cause, a loose harness connection at the actuator junction box, exactly as Amara had suggested. As Eleanor was being escorted to an office to sign her transfer papers, she looked back one last time. She saw Julian Sterling standing by the window, watching his daughter's plane ascend into the stormy sky. He wasn't watching it as a chairman watching an asset. He was watching it as a father watching his legacy take flight. And in that moment, Eleanor Vance finally understood. She hadn't been guarding a temple of exclusivity. She had been standing at the door, blocking its future. The transition from the hushed, climate-controlled elegance of the members' lounge to the cacophonous, fume-choked reality of Hangar 4B was a brutal assault on Eleanor Vance's senses. For the first month, she existed in a state of shock, moving like a ghost through a world she had only ever viewed from 30,000 feet. The subtle scent of white tea and fig was replaced by the acrid smells of hydraulic fluid, industrial solvents, and burnt coffee. The soft murmur of quiet conversations was obliterated by the scream of pneumatic wrenches, the roar of jet engines being tested, and the constant blaring rock music favored by the mechanics. Her new supervisor, Hector Rodriguez, was a broad, powerfully built man in his 60s, with grease permanently embedded in the lines of his hands and a face that seemed carved from granite. He had been with the company for 40 years, starting as a cleaner and working his way up to director of maintenance through sheer brilliance and hard work. He had seen a dozen executives like Eleanor come and go. He looked at her on her first day, standing awkwardly in her ill-fitting safety vest and brand-new, painfully stiff steel-toed boots, and his expression was one of profound. The silence that descended after Julian Sterling's verdict was not empty. It was a physical presence, a crushing weight that buckled the foundations of Eleanor Vance's world. The air, once scented with bespoke fragrances of success, now tasted of ash and ozone, the aftermath of a lightning strike. She did not weep. The shock was too profound, the humiliation too absolute for such a simple release. Tears were for tragedies. This was an annihilation. Her 30-year career, a meticulously constructed edifice of starched collars, whispered deference, and weaponized judgment, had not just been condemned, it had been unwritten. She was escorted not out of the building, but up to a floor she had never visited. The 50th floor, the executive sanctum. Julian Sterling's office was less a room and more a statement of intent. A vast expanse of brushed steel, dark wood, and a single panoramic window that consumed an entire wall, turning the Teterboro airfield below into a scale model. The Gulfstream G650, Flight 7, was a silver dart climbing into the bruised twilight sky. Amara was on that plane. The girl in the hoodie was ascending, while Eleanor was about to be buried. Julian did not offer her a seat. He stood before the window, a silhouette against the dying light. Amara, surprisingly, was still there, visible on a large screen, via a video call from the jet's cabin. Her face was calm, her intelligent eyes watching Eleanor with an unnerving, analytical stillness. "Ms. Vance," Julian began, his voice a low resonance that seemed to vibrate in the floor. "Your employment with Aura Jets is not terminated. That would be an ending. I am more interested in transformations." Eleanor's heart, a frozen stone in her chest, flickered with a desperate, foolish hope. A second chance, a reprimand. "You have spent 3 decades curating an experience of seamless, effortless perfection," he continued, turning from the window. His eyes were not angry. They were worse. They were disappointed, as one might be with a flawed but expensive piece of machinery. "You built a beautiful facade, but a facade, by its nature, is a lie. It conceals the complex, often messy reality of the systems that support it. You became so enamored with the surface that you forgot the substance. You judged my daughter not on her credentials, which were on the ticket you destroyed, but on the fact that she did not match the upholstery." He walked to a large empty desk of polished obsidian. "Therefore, you are being promoted. As of this moment, you are the director of a new department, the Office of Systemic Integrity." The title was grand, impressive. It was a life raft. But then he explained the mandate. "Your new office will be here, on this floor. Glass walls. You will have 1 assistant and unlimited access to every internal communication channel within this company. Your sole responsibility will be to serve as the final destination for every single failure, complaint, and imperfection that occurs within our global operation. Every piece of lost luggage, every delayed flight due to crew scheduling errors, every complaint about cold coffee or a rude flight attendant, every instance where the Aura experience cracks. It all comes to your desk. You will not delegate. You will personally read every report. You will personally listen to the audio logs of every disgruntled customer. You will personally draft every letter of apology. You will become the living, breathing archive of our failures. The hope in Eleanor's chest died, replaced by a cold, creeping horror. It was a punishment of exquisite, intellectual cruelty. He was not sending her to the grease and noise of the hangar, a world she could dismiss as beneath her. He was trapping her here, in the heart of the power structure, but making her the queen of its refuse. She would still wear the uniform, but it would be a shroud. She would be surrounded by the perfection she worshipped, forced to spend her days cataloguing its every flaw. Your mission, Julian concluded, his voice devoid of all emotion, is not merely to apologize. It is to understand why the system failed, to trace each complaint back to its root cause. Was it a poorly worded protocol, a gap in training? Or was it, as in your case, a simple, catastrophic failure of human judgment? You will write a report on each incident. These reports will be circulated to the entire executive board, including myself and Amara. You will be the guardian of our humility, Ms. Vance. You will spend your days staring into the abyss of our imperfections. And in doing so, perhaps you will begin to understand the true meaning of the standards you claim to uphold. He gestured to the screen where Amara watched, silent. Any questions? Eleanor's mouth was dry. She looked at Amara, seeking a flicker of pity, of triumph, anything. But the young woman's expression was neutral, the look of an engineer examining a stress fracture. It was Amara who finally spoke, her voice crisp and clear from the jet speakers. One more condition, Dad. Every report she writes must begin with a full, detailed account of her interaction with me in the lounge, every single one. A reminder of the prime example. So she never forgets what a systemic failure, born from a personal one, looks like. Julian nodded slowly. An excellent addendum. So it shall be. For the first 6 months, Eleanor's life was a waking nightmare. Her glass-walled office became known among the staff as the confessional. Her former colleagues would hurry past, their eyes fixed forward, as if eye contact might be contagious. She was a pariah, a ghost haunting the executive suite. Her days were a relentless torrent of human frustration. She listened to a recording of a man weeping because a priceless family heirloom, a watch his father had worn in the war, had been lost in transit. She read the furious, multi-page email from a woman who missed her sister's wedding because a pilot, arrogant and dismissive, refused to hold the plane for 3 minutes, despite the connecting flight being an Aura jet. She watched security footage of a flight attendant mocking a non-English-speaking passenger, mimicking his accent to the amusement of her colleague. Each failure was a mirror reflecting her own actions. The pilot's arrogance was her arrogance. The flight attendant's cruelty was her cruelty. The system's indifference was the indifference she had perfected. Every night, she would go home to her sterile, silent apartment, the echoes of angry, disappointed, and heartbroken voices ringing in her ears. She drank expensive wine, not for the taste, but for the oblivion it offered. She was drowning. Her first reports were clinical, detached, written in the passive corporate language she had mastered. She described failures in protocol and recommended amendments to training manuals. They were technically proficient, but emotionally hollow, and they were all sent back by Julian Sterling with a single, handwritten note in red ink. Dig deeper. Frustrated, angry, and on the verge of resigning, she was reviewing the case of the missed wedding. She had already written the report, blaming a communication lapse between the ground crew and the flight crew. But his note, dig deeper, goaded her. She pulled the pilot's personnel file. Captain Davies, a decorated veteran with a flawless flight record. But in the file, she found a series of passenger complaints from the last 2 years, all minor, all dismissed. They painted a picture of a man whose confidence had curdled into contempt. He saw passengers not as people, but as cargo. He saw schedules as sacred, and human concerns as irritants. She saw herself. She saw the condescending laugh she had given Amara. She saw the dismissive wave of her hand. That night, she rewrote the report. She began, as mandated, with the story of Amara Sterling, but this time she wrote it differently. She didn't just state the facts. She described the plush carpet, the triumphant smirk she had felt, the satisfying, crisp sound of the tearing cardstock. She wrote of the profound, unearned certainty she had possessed. Then she wrote about Captain Davies. She didn't just analyze his actions, she analyzed his mindset. She wrote about how a culture that prizes exclusivity and efficiency above all else can breed a quiet contempt for the very people it is meant to serve. She argued that the problem wasn't a communication protocol, it was a cultural pathology. She concluded, her hands trembling as she typed, "We do not need a new rule. We need a new ethos. We have a mistaken luxury for humanity and efficiency for empathy. The failure was not at the gate. It began in our boardroom, with the values we chose to celebrate." She sent it at 3 a.m., convinced she would be fired by dawn. The next morning, an email was waiting for her. It was from Julian Sterling. It contained a single word: better. That was the turning point. She stopped seeing her job as a punishment and began to see it as a puzzle. The failures were no longer just a litany of shame. They were data points, clues to a deeper sickness within the company she had helped build. Her mind, once dedicated to remembering the trivial preferences of billionaires, now became a formidable instrument of systemic analysis. She was no longer a gatekeeper. She was a diagnostician. She discovered that the most frequent luggage mishandling occurred on flights where the ground crew had the highest rates of overtime, pointing to exhaustion and burnout. She found that the highest number of in-flight complaints correlated with routes where the flight attendants had the least amount of layover time for rest. She proved, with spreadsheets and charts, that the relentless pursuit of efficiency was actively degrading the experience. She was mapping the company's soul and finding it wanting. 2 years into her sentence, a crisis landed on her desk that made all the others pale in comparison. A young couple had chartered a jet for a medical emergency. Their 6-year-old son had a rare autoimmune disorder and needed to be transported in a sterile environment to a specialized clinic in Switzerland. The flight was a logistical nightmare of medical equipment, specialist nurses, and split-second timing. And Aura jets had failed. A series of small, seemingly insignificant errors. A miscommunication about the power supply for a ventilator, a catering mix-up that brought food containing allergens aboard, a 20-minute delay on the tarmac due to a paperwork error, had a cumulative, catastrophic effect. The boy suffered a severe reaction mid-flight and arrived at the clinic in critical condition. The parents were not threatening to sue. They were too broken, too consumed with their son's fight for life. The report was a quiet, devastating account of their terror at 40,000 feet. Eleanor felt a cold dread as she read it. This was the ultimate consequence of the culture she had championed. This was not a lost watch or a missed wedding. This was a life hanging in the balance, jeopardized by the same casual arrogance she had displayed. She worked for 72 hours straight. She traced every point of failure. The paperwork error was made by a junior concierge, afraid to question a senior pilot's rushed manifest. The catering mix-up was a simple data entry mistake, made by a clerk working a double shift. The power supply issue was a failure by the ground crew to read a technical rider, dismissing it as passenger nonsense. No single person was solely to blame. It was 1,000 tiny cuts of indifference. It was the system itself. She didn't just write a report. She created a proposal. A complete overhaul of how Aura jets handled flights with special circumstances, particularly medical transports. She called it the Amara Protocol. It was a system built not on assumptions, but on verifications. It created a single, empowered mission manager for each sensitive flight, a person with the authority to override pilots and ground crew to ensure passenger needs were met. It mandated triple checks and direct communication with the clients, treating their input not as a request, but as a critical part of the flight plan. She requested a face-to-face meeting with Julian and Amara. She walked into the same office, 2 years older, her hair now a simple, elegant silver bob. The severe designer dresses were gone, replaced by simple, well-tailored trousers and silk blouses. The armor was gone. She walked not with the brittle posture of a guard, but with the grounded confidence of an architect. Amara was there, no longer a student, but the company's COO. She had her father's quiet intensity, but her eyes held a spark of something more, a visionary's curiosity. Eleanor did not apologize or make excuses. She laid out the facts of the medical flight with cold, brutal clarity. Then, she presented her protocol. She explained the chain of command, the verification processes, the new training modules required. The current system is designed to protect the schedule and the aircraft, she said, her voice steady. That is its prime directive. But for certain clients, the passenger is the mission. Our system is not structured to recognize that distinction. It defaults to its own self-preservation. It is, by its very design, unempathetic. The Amara Protocol changes the prime directive when necessary. She finished and stood in silence. The only sound was the faint whisper of the ventilation system. Julian Sterling stared at the proposal on his desk. He looked at Eleanor, then at his daughter. "It's the right way to think," Amara said quietly, her eyes on Eleanor. "You stopped looking for someone to blame and started looking for the flaw in the logic. You're treating the company like an engineering problem." Julian picked up the proposal. He read through it again, slowly. Finally, he looked up at Eleanor. The detached, disappointed expression was gone. In its place was something she had never seen directed at her before: respect. "This is brilliant," he said. "It's proactive, intelligent, and necessary. It's exactly what this company needs." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "I created the Office of Systemic Integrity as a prison for you, Ms. Vance. I intended it to be a place where your career went to die. It seems you have turned it into a laboratory instead." He stood up and walked toward her. "I am approving this protocol, effective immediately. And I am expanding your department's mandate. From now on, no new company-wide protocol is to be implemented without your office's approval. You are no longer our archivist of failures. You are now the architect of our resilience." He was giving her power, real power. Not the petty tyranny of the lounge, but the power to shape the very bones of the company. "There is one more thing," Eleanor said, her voice catching slightly. "The family. The boy. We are covering all of his medical expenses, indefinitely," Julian said, "and I have made a $10 million donation to the clinic in their name. But money is a clumsy apology." "I'd like to speak with them," Eleanor said, "when they're ready. Not as a representative of the company, just as a person, to tell them I understand how we failed them, and that their experience will ensure it never happens again." Amara nodded slowly. I think they'd appreciate that. Months later, Eleanor stood by the windows of the Teterboro lounge, but she was not on duty. She was observing. Her office was still on the 50th floor, but she made a point of spending time on the ground, watching her new protocols in action. She saw a young staff member approach a flustered-looking man in a simple, inexpensive suit. The staff member's posture was initially dismissive, his smile tight. Eleanor felt a familiar chill. But then she saw him pause, take a breath, and consciously change his approach. He leaned in, his expression softening into one of genuine concern. He was listening. She turned away from the window, a faint, unfamiliar smile on her lips. It was not a smile of triumph or superiority. It was the quiet, weary, and deeply satisfying smile of a repairman who sees the machine, once broken, now running smoothly. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Hector Rodriguez in maintenance. That new diagnostic protocol you designed just flagged a potential hydraulic leak on N80HJS 15 minutes before the software would have caught it. You might have just saved a jet. Not bad for a suit. Eleanor typed back a simple reply. We're all ground crew now, Hector. She walked out of the lounge, her footsteps silent on the polished marble. She was no longer Eleanor Vance, the fearsome gatekeeper of a gilded cage. That woman was gone, vaporized on a day of reckoning. In her place was someone new. Someone who understood that true perfection was not the absence of flaws, but the relentless, humble, and compassionate process of fixing them. She had been sent to the ground, and in the wreckage, she had finally learned how to fly.